Right.
We're good to go.
I will get this up.
If anybody has any questions as we go through in the middle, then feel free to just jump in.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is totally meant to be free dialogue. We find we've had the most success when we get, great conversation, talking points and questions. So throw them in, throw your hand in, whatever you got to do, bang two sticks together, wave the puppy in front of the camera.
The other thing is sometimes if we start to hear a lot of feedback, we'll go through and mute everybody, just so that we don't hear a lot of echoing, but feel free to unmute yourselves and chat away. All right, that's the one big thing. All right, so here's lesson 1, guys. All right. Welcome to running school. I think a lot of you guys know who we are, right? Right, so I'm Ashley. I work with John and Justin. If you don't know me, I have been with them actually almost close to a year and a half now, a little bit longer than that. I am kind of just a recreational runner, ex-collegiate soccer player, but running is kind of part of who soccer players are. So it's continued through the spectrum. And we really look forward to having you guys here and going through this. So who's next?
Justin always likes to go last. So, So again, guys, thanks for hopping on. This is going to be a lot of fun. We really love doing this. It's something we've had on the burner for a while, and this whole situation kind of gave us the impetus to kind of throw it together. So, like Ashley, I'm a soccer player. I played collegiate, and I ran my first 5K in 2010. It was the Pitch for Kids 5K over in Fishkill, and I was immediately hooked. And the only reason I ran it was because I was bribed with a pizza, like a whole pie just for myself if I could hit a certain time. So if you know me, you're no stranger to the fact that I'm obsessed with pizza. So just kind of, that's how it came together.
All right. And for anybody I don't know, I am Justin. I have been running since basically I found out that I was only allowed 4 years of eligibility for rowing in college, and needed something to sort of occupy my time once I ended up in grad school, and sort of fell into triathlons and hated the running part. And so I think it's something about the rower in me that I decided if I really hated the running part of triathlons, I should sign up for strictly marathons for 2 years just in order to figure it all out. And we've really, really enjoyed being able to work with people and like to use kind of the term like demedicalize some of the running stuff and simplify things for everybody. And a lot of the stuff that goes on with running is not the most straightforward, but it's also not the most complicated. And so I think this is a really good opportunity to be able to present a lot of the information so that everyone has a really, really good library resource and way to understand everything. And sort of move forward and kind of push themselves a little bit with their own training.
Basically, we can have anybody start at any given time and give them a plan to do it. Right. So lesson 1 is strength training at home. And this is we're gonna kind of go through different tests that you can do to test your readiness to run. These tests are kind of also there to point out weak points that you may end up with injuries from. So our goal is just to kind of go through these, give you ideas, talk a little bit about load and capacity as we go, and how to prevent injuries. One of the big things that runners suffer from often is all these overuse injuries. And we don't necessarily always like the term injury prevention, but we want to help you get stronger so that you don't have breakdown.
One of the terms you're going to hear us say a lot is load the tissue. When we say load the tissue, anytime you hear us say that, just think about basically strength training. So if you're going to do a bicep curl, you're loading the bicep, you're loading the tissue with some amount of resistance. So when we say load the tissue, it just means implementing some sort of strength movement.
All right, so this is a quote from one of our colleagues, Chris. He's awesome. He's a PT out of Seattle. We actually went in January to take his course out in Seattle, but when runners cannot run, they suffer an identity crisis. And I think this is a huge thing to put out here. You're going to learn, I'm like the quote queen. So all the quotes that are in the presentations are from me. But when runners can't run, what happens? We get upset. We kind of go into this slump, and it's really frustrating. And the whole goal is to have that not happen. And that's why we're here. That's why we're doing this. We are here to kind of give you guys the best evidence and the kind of best ways for you to move forward and continue to stay injury free as you continue to run.
Want me to go?
Go ahead.
All right. So a lot of different benefits of running. We talk about cardiovascular activity and what are the benefits of cardio throughout the week. One of them is we can't discredit moderate intensity exercise. Everybody wants to talk about high intensity work. HIIT training has taken off. There are even a number of different smaller boutique gyms and programs that are popping up that focus a lot on high intensity work. High intensity work is great, but let's be honest, moderate exercise is kind of like the best of all worlds. So 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise, a week has been associated with a lot of different health benefits. Anything from cardiovascular risks, blood disease like diabetes, things like that. On top of just being healthier and happier. So some other studies have found a lot of benefits of running and cardiovascular activity, and this is just a slew of them. So we don't have to go through every single one of them. A lot of them are very intuitive. As Justin alluded to, some things are very counterintuitive with running, but not all that complicated. So we'll let you guys go back and refer to this slide as much as you want. But one of the big things is that it definitely slows muscle atrophy. One of the things I've loved in working with runners, and one of my favorite pieces of information I've learned is that in the lower body, well, it's no surprise that we lose muscle mass as we age. And as we get older, lean muscle tissue is really what helps prevent injuries and maintains function, maintains mobility, maintains independence, really. And in the lower limbs, the calf muscle complex, so right in the back of your lower leg, is a muscle group that actually atrophies the most and the quickest. In running, the calf muscle complex is one of the main muscle groups for propulsion, for moving you forward. So, it's kind of a double whammy when you really strengthen that muscle group. Not only are you able to run better, but you're able to move better and walk better. And I think one of the things that a lot of us would recognize, kind of a characteristic of an older gait pattern, is a shuffling gait pattern. And that's really because we don't maintain the mobility the ability to propel forward with that calf complex and really push your toes into the ground. So that's perhaps one of my favorite parts and aspects about training runners and training for running longevity.
Other ones I love to kind of point out on here, because so many people say, hey, running's not necessarily great for your joints. It helps maintain your bone density and decreases osteoporosis risk, and then maintains joint mobility. So let's just throw that out there. Should we be telling people to stop running to kind of save their joints? Not necessarily. Obviously, if there's other comorbidities and other conditions that are occurring, maybe we'll have to say that. But if anything, we want people to keep running. We want people to keep moving. And that's just going to be able to help people kind of maintain the status throughout life that they're saying, hey, you know what? I'm still healthy. I can do this. It's interesting because I have a woman who's a runner, went in, unfortunately, for like a meniscal surgery. The doctor went on her knee and said, you look like you have the knees of a 20-year-old, and she's been a runner and she's 65 years old. So it's kind of just a thought, like, that is awesome to see, and it's awesome to hear that running will actually just keep our joints better than they were, or than they wouldn't be if we weren't running. All right. So I guess, John.
I'm talking a lot, so I could use this right now.
Does anybody have any questions about anything so far? All right. All right. So we'll go into some injury statistics. And I think these you'll kind of are common sense. But when we look at how many people run in the US per year, about 40 million, and that's a big number, obviously. Greater than 10 million run over 100 days a year. Incidence of lower extremity injury, and this one should be no-brainer. This is where we see the most injuries in runners, is up to 70, not basically close to 80%. When people run and when they're moving, we see these overuse injuries because people try to load themselves too soon. They haven't had a proper buildup. They kind of haven't had the way that they haven't found the way that they need to go in regards to their training, and they try to do too much too soon. So if we look, the knee is the most commonly injured site. There's a lot of shock absorption that goes on at the knee. And there's a lot of other things that go on at the knee, and a lot of ways that the knee goes into playing into running. And we see, people talk about runner's knee and the IT band and how it's all pain in the knee. So we see the knee most often. Among recreational runners, females do sustain more injuries. There's always many debates about that, but I think one of the big things that I will talk a lot about is that females just don't do enough strength training. And this is why females end up with breakdowns sooner than males, or it's why they get injured more often, why we see hip issues, why we see knee issues, and as well as those Achilles and feet issues. So just some things to think about as we go forward.
I think one of my favorite take homes about this is I love telling people, don't freak out. You're injured. Okay. Show me a runner who's never been injured. Show me a runner who's never experienced some amount of pain or discomfort with things. And I don't want to spoil, quote that Ashley will throw in here a little later. But it is what it is. I've been injured. Justin's been injured. Ashley's been injured. I think between the three of us, sure, I've been injured a little bit more. Usually helps to kind of.
I'd say recently, John.
Yeah, recently, because it's just a different story. But it's okay to be injured, and that's usually the first thing that I tackle with my runners that come in with any kind of discomfort. Is listen, it's okay to be injured. You're not the first. You're not going to be the last. But that's a huge number of people that run in the U.S. And the other thing that we have to remember is, show me a 50, 60, 70-year-old individual that's playing hockey, later in life, that's playing football, that's playing soccer, that's playing kickball. We're built for longevity. We have engines that are built for longevity. We're not built to be able to handle the rigors of that, the explosive sports, but the really, moderate intensity exercise at a given speed. That's what we're built for. We're going to be doing it longer. And so things are going to break down little by little. And if you look at this, this slide right here, so if we look at the frequency and the distribution between genders, patellofemoral pain syndrome, which is kind of a garbage term, it just means pain at the front of the knee. Men will sustain that, a little bit more. ITB syndrome, also on the outside of the knee, so plantar fasciitis, pain on the bottom of the foot. Meniscal injuries, so that's a soft tissue within the knee itself. Tibial stress syndrome, also known as shin splints, that's what we've all commonly heard it called. Again, that's a very gross garbage term. Patellar tendonitis, pain at the tendon just below the kneecap, and then the Achilles, right behind the bottom lower leg and right above the heel. So those are the most common injuries that we'll see. And again, it's no surprise. And I used to be really daunted by a lot of this, but it's really, by the end of this, hopefully you guys should have a very simple and straightforward understanding to kind of help kind of weave through any of this that might come up, because it's really easy to navigate.
I think kind of looking down, if we look at like the glute med injuries, these are ones where people are like, oh, I have hip bursitis. Yeah. But a lot of the time we see them be more of this overuse injury in the hip, and it becomes more of this kind of tendinopathy because it's prolonged. And it's something that's not just going to go away. So we'll kind of go over, we'll go over testing strategies for these and ways for you guys to work on them to kind of say, hey, you know what, maybe these won't happen. And the other thing is if you look at this list, 4 of the things in the top list are knee. So that's kind of just going back to that. The knee is injured most often. All right, so this is a big one. So a lot of the time when we run, the stress placed on our body is 8 times our body weight, right? So think about that. That's a lot of extra force that you are moving, ground contact, you're hitting the ground and you are pushing back at 8 times your body weight. I think just let that soak in a little bit. And sometimes when we even see the Achilles, which is one of the most commonly injured sites in the body, that can be up to 12 times body weight that we're placing on that tendon and that muscle. So we're moving a lot of load every step we take. And we look at running, it's a series of single leg events. It's a series of single leg hops. So I always make the comparison, try to do a big hop, try to do a short hop. And we'll go into running mechanics next lecture and stuff of that sort. But it's always one of those things. I'm like, how can we decrease this? How can we make it better for you? And also, how can we get you stronger? So we're going to keep going through that. John, anything you wanted to say here?
No, if anything, this is the slide that reinforces why we need to strength train, why your body needs to be bulletproof. If you think about a soldier going into battle, they have body armor. If you think about ships and tanks, they have body armor, because if they're going to sustain a lot of force pushing into them, they need to be able to handle that and still have structural rigidity. And so this goes back to the concept of Newton's law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. If I punch the wall punches back. When your foot hits the ground pushes back into your body, and that equal force has to be absorbed somehow or handled somehow. And if it's going to be 8 times your body weight pushed into the ground, that's 8 times your body weight pushing back. And think of how many steps you take per run, per week, per month, per training season. And this is why we need to make you bulletproof. And there's no way to strengthen the body without actually loading it up and giving it some resistance.
And this is why we always talk about that you can't always do too much too fast, especially when it comes to running, because breakdown is inevitable at that point. All right. So here are some things that, people used to think are significant factors when it comes to being injured. All right. So these things are things that have been a causation to my injury, things that have kind of said, hey, you know what, over time, people have started to believe that these things cause injuries. So look at the list. All right. Flexibility. It's a huge one we hear often. Being flexible does not always prevent injuries. If anything, sometimes it can be a cause for injuries, but we're not too concerned about stretching. And you'll hear us talk about that a bit more as we go through this. We can look at somebody's arch height. If you have flat feet, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to run into issues in your feet and your ankles and your kind of the back of your leg. It doesn't necessarily matter. And there's always ways that we can look at that up the chain and down the chain. It says, hey, you know what? It may not just be your arch height. There's other things and other factors that go in here. So it may not always be just due to that. Your Q angle, we hear that often in females. I have a larger Q angle, so I have hip issues, or this is why my knees, having issues. And that is a big one that I like to kind of, just bust myths all the time with. People have said over the years, women have more ACL injuries or more knee injuries due to Q angle. And a lot of the time, it's just because we need to work on different types of dynamics. We need to learn more neuromuscular control. We need to get these people running and doing exercises that are going to strengthen them so that they can run a little bit better. Rear foot motion, and then previous injury. Just because you had a previous injury doesn't necessarily mean that you're always going to get injured again. May it be a little bit more likely that you can? Yes, but not always. Any questions about this?
Yeah, Ashley, can you explain Q angle a little bit? I'm very unfamiliar with that one.
Yeah, so Q angle is basically, and if we explain it, it's basically if you draw a woman, like you draw hips, so right, you have the width of a hip,
Yep.
And then you have the knee. So in a lot of females, what are you going to see from hip to knee? You're going to see basically this triangle, right? Okay, and some males it's just straight down. So that Q angle is basically, think about that triangular shape of that woman's hips or that person's hips. There are some men who have a bigger Q angle too, but more common due to the pelvic shape in a female, we'll see a bigger Q angle.
Gotcha.
And for years and years and years, that has been said that it's a cause of, all these injuries in females. But I have a lot of words to say about it, just because of the way that, females develop and the way that females develop earlier in life. It's more of a control thing. It's more of they haven't learned how to use their bodies properly. Men have a development of many more years. Females typically have their max bone growth by 16. Males get it up until like 21, 22, maybe even a little bit longer. So their bodies learn how to use their muscles over time. With females, we have that short, quick spurt and we're done, and then their muscles are just like, hey, you know what? Like, I'm just hanging out and I'm going to do what I was told, but I don't really know how to do it.
And one of the things I've seen, Liz, this is something that, I think will help you. Unfortunately, what I've seen a lot of my younger males, and even with me when I was in high school, we started working out when I was in high school. A lot of men strength train when they start it when they're in high school and they're still developing. A lot of female, and this is the lion's share. Okay, now they're obviously outliers, but the lion's share of younger men that are athletes are going to start strength training earlier, and a lot of females aren't doing nearly as much heavy strength training during their athletic years. And then the few who go on to competitive colleges, they don't start their strength training until they get to college. So now it's even a little bit more of a sharp spike on that strength curve rather than a gradual application of resistance training on top of 6 days a week training in that sport at the collegiate level. So that's one of the other things I think is an issue. It's more that societal factor. I love the fact that most athletes are strength training younger now, and Younger women and females are strength training more too at younger ages, which is awesome. I love the fact that this is catching on like wildfire. But to this point, I think it's been males start at a younger age while they're still developing, and women are starting after they've already reached skeletal maturity.
Yeah, I think that's kind of common for the mount is a lot of these girls are coming in having never been to a gym or lifting a weight. They don't know how much to lift. They just lift what their coach tells them. Like, and we don't have strength and conditioning yet. So,
and like you said, running is kind of like the stepchild that's just kind of pushed off to the side. It's like, yeah, runners don't need strength training. They don't need the gym, or they don't need all this. Even at
They
the
need body weight strength. That's what a lot of people think. And body weight strength to build capacity. We want to load those tendons. We want to keep things healthy. It's not enough to just use body weight exercise to keep healthy, especially if you want to stay healthy as a runner.
Yeah. So
I think that's a good take home.
Yeah, regardless of the age, and for all of us here on this Zoom call right now, strength training is the biggest thing that we can do for ourselves as runners.
Yep. All right, so here we go.
Good segue.
Great segue into that.
Go ahead to the next one then, Ash.
All right.
So there's a couple of things that you want to do. If somebody said, hey, listen, I'll give you, $1,000 if you can kind of go in the boxing ring and last one round with, this boxer, you'd be like, well, I'm not ready for that. I have no clue what to do. Same rules apply regardless of the sport. So not only the skill. Now, granted, the barriers to entry for running are much lower. You need a good pair of sneakers, or 4 or 5 if you talk to Justin, Ashley, and I long enough. You need a pair of sneakers. You need some open road. And a lot of people think that the skill acquisition isn't really necessary. Skill comes with time, but we need to make sure that your body can handle the rigors of, again, hitting the ground, time over time, step over step, like I was alluding to before. You're hitting the ground is hitting back into your body. Can you handle that? So this is something that we take all of our runners through.
So what's coming up, and we'll just kind of segue, we're going to go through a bunch of videos, and this is going to lead you into these videos will lead you into exercises that you can start doing if you feel like you are not doing well at them. If you've been in the clinic with us, more than likely you have gone through some of them. And you know what? These are just for your FYI, keep you guys healthy while you're going. So before that, I guess we're going to talk about capacity a little bit. And you've heard me use this term over and over and over again now. I keep talking about capacity. We keep talking about load. So John kind of put this one together, so muscles produce force, right? We produce force with our muscles. Tendons transmit the force. So basically, tendons will store energy for you. And then when you go to run, those tendons will help you propel. They do help you with power. They help you kind of jump higher. Yes, muscle force helps with that too, but those tendons store that energy. Bones absorb the force, right? And then remember, we're hitting the ground thousands of times per run. So think about that, what it means when it comes down to tendons and muscles. John, anything else?
Yeah, so one of the other unique differences between runners and other sports, most of the time, again, don't take anything as a blanket statement. It's the majority of the injuries. The majority of injuries that are going to happen to the tendons or the bones. You're not going to see a lot of mid-substance muscle injuries like a hamstring pull or a quad pull or something like that. You see that more in sprinters and power athletes who are going from a dead stop to produce force, accelerating and decelerating. Running is a linear sport. It's a linear activity at a consistent speed. So there's rarely any gradual pickup or slowdown. Now, I'm not saying a runner's not going to implement some striders or do some hill work or things like that. But by and large, majority of running related injuries are at the tendons. And the tendons, again, like Ashley said, their one job is to transmit the force the muscle produces. So just like, I love this picture. Ashley and I were laughing hysterically when we found it for the presentation. But it's no different. If the tendon can't handle the amount of force that's the muscle is telling it to do, it's going to get cranky and it's going to get angry.
And the groceries are all going to fall to the floor.
So the two different types of forces, actually, there's 3 different types of forces we need to think about when you're running. So the ground reaction force is exactly that I was talking about. You hit the ground pushes back into your body. So that force is going up. The force of gravity is pulling you down. It's trying to slow you down. And then you have the aerodynamic drag force. This is less if you're on a treadmill indoors. Obviously, it's higher when you go outside, the ambient air. And if it's a really windy day, or if any of us have run on a track enough, we know that one side of the track, you're always going to hit that wall. because it's just the way the direction the wind blows. So these are the three forces that we're going to be talking about that are going to act on the body and really have to be controlled against. So the other unique thing about running is the difference in gait. When we talk about gait, it's basically how your legs and limbs are moving. So when we're walking, we have a series of double limb stance when both feet are in touch with the ground, and then you have single limb stance when one leg is swinging through the air. Now in walking, you actually have more double limb stance than you do single limb stance. This is the biggest difference between walking and running. When we go to running then, it changes. The majority is spent in single limb stance, and then you have the other leg swinging through. So running is a series of single leg hops going from one foot to the next over and over again. There is no time in the running gait cycle when both feet are in touch with the ground at the same time. This is why we say running is a series of single leg hops. And that's what we have to strengthen against. That's what we have to prepare for. And that's why it's so much more of a higher level and higher intensity activity than walking is. You can go to Disneyland and you can walk for 8 hours in the sun, right? And you're going to be tired. You're like, man, this sucks. But by the end, you're ready to go home and have some dinner, a nap, or a margarita. But you're not going to be as tired doing that as you are running. So it takes a lot more out of you, and the stress level goes up a lot. So just another graphic to kind of show the difference between walking and running.
I think one of the big takeaways when we look at walking versus running, right? You could see there was 40-60, okay? Right, John? So one of them were in 40% stance, the other one were in 60% swing, and then vice versa, they switch. So obviously, if we are kind of in that, swing phase more often, and we're kind of moving and our body is propelling over the ground, and we're off the ground more often, and then we have that short hit on the ground, that's actually going to take a little bit more energy, like John was talking about. So we're getting now into these kind of things that you should look at, especially when you start to run a little bit more, especially some ones that may be ignored most often. A lot of people, when it comes to things like the feet, they don't necessarily think about their foot mobility. They plantar fasciitis. They're like, oh, you know what? I got this really tight thing on the bottom of my foot. But hey, can you move all your feet? So we're going to go through these. We're going to play the video, and we're going to go over what you should look for. So I'm going to go ahead and play the video first. And it's really funny because we did these, little over a month ago now. And I will tell you, I've gotten a lot better at doing this. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and play it. Right. All right. So what I'm doing here is trying to isolate my big toe motion. All right. Then I'm trying to isolate all my lesser toes up. And the last one I'm going to do is I am going to try to spread all my toes. Okay. So you can see them, they'll move apart. Right. And these are all things that with your feet, you should be able to do. And often we call it toe yoga. One of the big things that we say is that, I'm going to stop it because there's some noise there, is that these are not easy. And if you can't do them, I say practice, practice, practice. The things that you're going to look for here, inability to isolate movements. So if you can't do one of these, like I said, practice, because it's just your brain saying, hey, you know what? I don't know how to do it yet. And obviously if you have some like arthritis in the big toe joint, these may be a little bit harder, but you know what? Try it. Toe gripping. So toe gripping is when you kind of grasp all your toes into the ground to try to lift your big toe. You don't want to see that, because then you're just knowing that you are not able to kind of relax things and isolate as well as you should. And then does the ball of your foot lift off the ground? So are you rolling your foot to the outside to try to get your toes up, especially your big toe? So I say out of all of these, I look for the big toe motion probably the most, because our big toe is so important when it comes to running.
I got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So let's say like two different scenarios or three. Like, so someone tries this and can't do it at all, or someone tries this and is okay, or someone tries this, oh, this is easy. For each of those scenarios, how often should we be doing these things to try to improve, especially if it's one of the first two?
That's one of the first two. So one of the first two was.
So either you can't do it at all, or it's kind of challenging, you know.
You know what, here's the thing, this is something that I would throw in every day. Just like I tell people, I would like you to wear toe spreaders every day, if you have them. Toe spreaders. So
Actually,
Yeah, there you go. John has them right there. Mine are upstairs. But basically, we should have, just like our hands, we should have space in between our toes, right? Our feet should not be they should not be crossed over. Your toes shouldn't look like this. You know, and I'd show you my feet if I really wanted to stand up because I'm luckily enough to have some space between my toes. But we should be able to kind of utilize that. And it's a mechanism. Our feet aren't as agile as our hands. We don't have the dexterity in our feet, but you know what? They should be able to move independently of each other.
Yeah.
So that is something that I would say it won't hurt you to do daily. Like it will not hurt if you have difficulty doing it.
So my response to that is always, how often do we have to work on posture? As often as necessary. You're working on posture every day of the week. Especially if you notice, if you're starting to slouch, if you work a lot in that position, it takes a little bit more effort to correct that initially. And then as you get stronger, it doesn't take nearly as much effort. So, you know, much like a basketball player, they work on free throws thousands and thousands of times throughout the season because it's a single repetitive motion and their goal is to maintain that skill. So first comes the skill acquisition phase where Miko, like you said, if somebody can't do it at all, we have them work on it until they can do it. And that just means that you have to get it done. That's no different than now obviously this is the extreme end of the spectrum. If somebody has a neurologic incident, or we work with people who have had strokes and they can't move their hand first, we start working on distal mobility by their hand and we isolate that hand with some resistance, and then they just work on one finger at a time. And then they go to two fingers, and then they go to the whole wrist. So the progression is no different. And most of the time, it's because they've never done before. You know, if I have my runners come in, I'd say 75% of people can't lift and move their toes on their own when they first come in. And then by the third week, they're like, hey, I can do it. I always get that email or that text.
Yep.
And they're like, I moved my big toe today for the first time. And it's so exciting for them.
It is. It's so exciting when it happens.
And it seems like it's so small and insignificant, but there was a great course, and it's called When the Foot Hits the Ground, Everything Changes. Your foot is literally the first point of contact with the ground with that 8 to 12 times your body weight. So what happens when your car tire is off camber? It wears improperly and it starts to break down all the mechanical pieces. What happens if there are not just one arch in your foot, there are 3 different arches in your foot that are independent? What if you can't maintain that rigidity when your foot hits the ground? And all of a sudden, this weakness is what causes breakdown. And once that moves, just like that car tire moves, everything else up the mechanical chain is going to be stressed improperly. So that's why these kind of things are so important. And it seems so simple, but yeah, we start with the foot. Let's start with the ground and work our way up.
I mean, it's like we have muscles have to work to move our hands. So similar to supporting our hands and grip strength, you know, when we put our foot on the ground, it has to be able to maintain what we put on it. We have to be able to absorb that force. If you see an arch collapse, sometimes it can just be simply due to lack of strength. You know, and just because you have a flat foot doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have strength, but it's something that we do look at and we look at often. So this is number 1 for screening tools. And if you can't do those, then you just practice those over and over again. All right. The next one that we look at often with runners, right? We talk about running being a series of single leg hops is just single leg balance. All right. So if we look at, and we'll kind of go over what to look for, just steadiness with balance, not losing your balance, arm position. So if their arms are flying all over the place and they're really utilizing their arms for counterbalance, breath holding, we want to make sure that you don't hold your breath as you stand on one leg. We don't hold our breath when we run. So if we're going to go and we're going to start running, holding breath and balance should not happen. And then wobble free. So here's just a video. You're going to try to stand for 20 to 30 seconds. The big thing here, but you don't necessarily want your legs to touch. And that's where I run into a lot of people in the clinic. They will let their legs touch. It's not a good indicator of true balance because you're giving yourself a little bit more awareness of where you are in space. So if you work on balance, try to really legs apart. And the other thing that sometimes I look for here in the clinic is also kind of the hips, right? Whether we're dropping, but that's single leg balance. Right. And you can move your arms wherever you'd like. Just really, if it's a little bit wobbly, it's okay. You just don't want to be falling over. All right. John's in here somewhere, I promise. Lateral step down. So most people if you've been with us in the clinic, you've seen the lateral step down. Okay. So here's what this is. All right. So lateral step down is you are literally on a step. I don't know. Let's play. And you are going up and down. Okay. We set a metronome for this. We set a metronome at 30 beats per minute. So you can hear how slow this is, and it has to be nice and controlled. The other thing that we're looking for during this is that you're going straight up and down. What a lot of people will do, technical difficulties over here, and I'll kind of get up and show you guys real quick. What a lot of people will do when they go into a step down, I don't have my step, but they're gonna go ahead and they're gonna throw their butt back and then they're gonna go down. The whole goal with a step down off the step for a runner is that you stay up nice and tall and you then lower yourself to the floor, right? We don't want to see too much excess kind of hinging motion from the hips. We're also going to look here with so many things that this can tell us. We can look at the toe gripping. We can see the trunk motion, balance. Somebody's struggling with balance a little bit, reaching for the floor. And then also we're looking to see whether this knee, as you go down, kind of caves in. Right, and that can give us a big kind of it's a big indicator of a lot of different things. But knee health especially is one of them. And then also just kind of, hip strength, stuff of that sort, we can kind of tone into here a little bit. All right, so here's the thing, you're doing 10 of these on each side. That's the minimum. I think we typically like to see a little bit more. John, you want to explain one?
Sure. So why not do the calves? Because this is one of the ones I said I love to work on. So going into calf raises, and one of the things you'll notice that is very different about these exercises than what you may have done on your own or heard is that beats per minute. So we love to do things at a tempo. So we usually go in increments of 30. So 30 beats per minute to start, and then as you get more advanced, go up to 60 beats per minute, 90 and 120 for some. But right now, the baseline, 30 beats per minute, we like to get the front foot elevated, and we like to get your torso going straight up towards the sky. A lot of people lean forward too much, and with a basic calf raise, you want to go nice and slow, and you want to go as vertical as possible and not lean too far forward. Notice with the last one, that's a theme. You don't want to lean too far forward and get your butt backwards with the step down. You don't want to do that with the calf raise either. What these tests are doing and these performance assessments are doing is really looking to see what is your capacity in the major groups or muscle groups or junctions and joints that are going to be stressed during running. So we like you to be able to do at least 25 reps for men and women if you're around 50 years old or younger, 50 to 60, about 20, 60 to 69, and so forth. So again, it all has to do with capacity in the tissue. And we think the biggest changes for people when they're like, yeah, I can do calf raises. I'm like, all right, show me. And then we do it again, and we either slow it down with the tempo or it's sped up for them. And, it makes a world of difference. One of my other favorite things to do here that we didn't do on this variation is hands behind your head. As often as we can, get our runners into an upright position. Getting your hands behind your head just keeps that torso upright, and it really challenges the core and the spine as well. So that's what has to happen. And when you think about running, mid-run stance, we're usually here. One elbow driven back, the other one driven forward, and your torso is upright, perhaps with a slight lean forward. So that's the only thing I would say is something else we could change that you may see us do and mess around with certain movements. Then we'll go to the all favorite bridge with straight leg raise. This is another staple that we find that a lot of people come in. We may not even be, treating back pain or hip pain, but we're going to say you're a runner. We need to make sure that you can do a straight leg raise with a bridge. So a bridge is basically lifting your hip up. So your body is in a straight line and your other leg is straight out in front of you. So right there, and then Ashley gets in the position, and notice her thighs are still parallel. So we don't want to see that one leg in the air pointing straight up to the ceiling, which is what a lot of people default to. So keeping your body and torso in a straight position, you want to hold that for at least 30 seconds and then switch it up. So one of the benchmarks is we like people to be able to do this 3 or 4 times 30 seconds each side, and it should be a medium intensity effort. You shouldn't be struggling. So we want you to be able to talk during it. We want to see a lack of hip wobble side to side or one hip dropping. We don't want to see excessive arching in the low back, and we definitely want to see
a lot of shaking like I just was.
So bridge with straight leg raise is definitely another position. And keep in mind, these are our baselines. This is what everybody should be able to do. If somebody can't do any of these, we have at least 3 or 4 regressions of them. And when people can do them, we have at least 3 or 4 progressions of these. So we can either pace it back and make it a little easier to still work the same muscle groups and get them stronger, or we progress you and challenge you a little bit more to make those groups even stronger.
I think one takeaway is that you can use these as exercises. You know, all these tests can be turned into a way for you to kind of just, you know, get better at them. You know, and people ask us, hey, what are your most important strength training exercises? A lot of the ones that we're showing you in the tests are ways that we work with people to get stronger over time. now it's John's turn.
So the side plank is another great exercise. Has everybody here, whether you're on mute or whatever, just give us a thumbs up on the camera. Has anybody ever done the exercise where they put the band around their feet and they kind of walk sideways? So that's called a monster walk or a side step, however you want to call it. And a lot of people do that. It became really popular about 10 years ago. It really gets the lateral hip musculature. And the lateral hip is important for stabilizing the trunk and the hips and the pelvis and the femur, preventing that one leg from collapsing and putting a lot of stress on everything else. So the problem is you can only do that exercise and target that muscle so much. So when you're moving it on your own, that's 100% your max voluntary contraction. The side plank variation with the top leg up has been shown to give you 100+% of your max voluntary contraction of that same muscle. So honestly, we like doing some side-to-side band work, but the side plank with the top leg up is probably the best benchmark for how much strength and stability you have at the lateral hip. If you can't do a straight plank like that, the regression is at the end of that exercise where you bend your knees, you shorten the lever a little bit. So this is the full long lever, and then you lift it up. You don't want to see a drop in your hips as soon as you lift that top leg up. And if you can't do that, then we regress you here, and that's still a challenge. And you'd be surprised. I've had some really strong people come in the clinic, and it's just not something they've worked on, and that has been the root cause of a lot of their issues. They are so strong. Everywhere else, they do a lot of squats, they do a lot of running, they do a lot of step-ups. Running is a straightforward activity, front to back. That's the sagittal plane. Unfortunately, a lot of conventional exercises are also in the sagittal plane, and we forget about that lateral side-to-side plane. So they did a study in the Navy at Naval Academy with the cadets, and they like to see 35 to 40 seconds for females and up to 50 seconds for males. So your goal should be to hold it for 15 seconds and then be able to hold the top leg for 15 seconds. That's specific to our runners. That's just what we found is more generally appealing and worthwhile for the running population to stay injury-free. Now we have the Copenhagen plank or the adductor side plank. So this now works the muscles on the inside of your thigh, a very often forgotten about muscle group. So get yourself set up on a bench or something that you can support yourself. Again,
Chairs work well too.
What'd you say?
Chairs work well too.
Chairs work great. And if that's too difficult, then you just shorten it up and you put more of your lower leg on there. And same rules apply. You want to go for a 20 to 30 second long lever hold is kind of the goal. And if you have somebody spotting you that has 2 fuzzy ears, even better.
These are not easy, just a disclaimer. Typically, we recommend definitely start with the short lever here. Don't always just try to jump. You know, I've had a history of some knee injuries, and I will say even still till this day, doing the standard long lever can throw that on and make me a little more uncomfortable. So just something to think about when you're going through this. But similar to the other exercises, if you can't do it, practice it more and practice these holds. That's a good way to implement into exercise.
You want to go, Ash? You want to go?
I'll go ahead. So what we're looking at for now, we're going into, as John wrote on this slide, leading into plyometrics. And we all know that running is that series of single leg hops. So how do we know that we are ready to start getting into hopping? This is often a test that we use when we try to get runners back into running, you know, because we need to make sure that their tendons, okay, most of the time we see running injuries with tendons, are able to withhold the capacity of running, able to kind of tolerate moving forward and kind of going into this. So what we're looking we're just doing bouncing. And here you're going to see the feet actually do not leave the ground. All right. So you are physically just going up and down on your toes quickly. And we're going to do this also to a tempo. So 120 to 150 beats per minute. We need that tempo. If we talk about cadence, and many of you have probably heard us talk about cadence, if it's below 160, you're at a higher risk for injury. We talk about that often. So here's what we're going to look for. Here's the video. You'll see John just kind of going up and down and bouncing if it wants to play. All right, so he's just kind of going up, and we're going to go that and throw tempos at it. So 120 to 150, that's pretty quick. And similar here, he put his arms above his head just like when we were talking about doing that calf raise. It's an awesome one to throw in. This is also something that we may say, hey, you know what, try it from time to time. It's not going to be harmful. So what we're looking for, loss of tempo, any type of pain, and then that forward hinge at the hips. The other thing is that if you can't maintain the height that you're coming off the ground, that's a huge one to look for too.
This is also done just at the beginning of quarantine when I had my final haircut, and it's quite different now.
All right. John, go ahead.
All right.
Phone is on a rampage.
All right. Yeah, she got some background noise. So pogo jumps is the progression of bouncing where your feet actually come off the ground. And again, the reasons are the same. We want to make sure we can repeatedly load the Achilles tendon complex, and can it continue that energy storage and release role that it plays when we run. So if Ashley were to hit play, the only difference is I get off the ground now for pogo jumps. So now you can see that my toes are barely leaving the ground, so I'm generating a little bit more force. And you can go ahead and watch those. And again, just the big difference. There it is. So that's the pogo jump getting off the ground. Low pogos and high pogos.
It kind of looks like you're trying to keep your heels off the ground. Is that right?
Your heels barely kiss the ground. So it's about making sure when you do that, your Achilles muscle group is constantly under tension and under load. And so that's one of the ways we can train it. So much like if I were doing bicep curls and I never went all the way down or all the way up and I didn't pause, I'm keeping constant tension on that area. So you're right. There's barely, my feet are barely kissing the ground, or my heels, I should say, at the very bottom part. But I am getting down because I have to generate the most amount of force I can. And the only way I can do that is by utilizing more of that range of motion. So I'm not actually going down and bending my knees. You'll notice my knees stay completely straight. So I'm relying just on that calf complex. So yeah, the heels really barely touch the ground here.
Right. So we'll move into kind of the harder one of here. We're going to go into single leg hopping. As you can see, John and I have matching shoes. But here's what you're looking for here. You want to make sure, because we've talked about how much now running is a series of single leg hops. You need to be able to withstand kind of the forces that are placed upon your body with running. So what we're looking for here is 30 seconds continuous single leg hop for 150 beats per minute. So it's pretty quick. All right. And I won't turn the volume on, but when you go 150 beats per minute, you're moving pretty fast. Similar to other things, you want to make sure that you're not losing ground height. Okay. You don't want to get off tempo. You don't want to see the arms flailing, because that also looks at the balance, loss of balance, and then hip drop. So you want to make sure your hips are staying level. You don't want to see every time you hit the ground, then that this hip drops below the other hip. So here we go. So you can see how pretty quick that is. And I'm doing it to a metronome, but you're just going to keep doing it, and you're going to do it for 30 seconds. All right. And then you'll do the other side too. And similar, we're looking at that capacity of that tendon in the calf complex. You're kind of just looking at kind of how well you can tolerate this. We're looking also for no pain during.
So for those of you who are wondering, you've never used a metronome before, there's plenty of free apps that you can download.
Yeah.
This is 150.
Faded out, John. Move your phone around.
What'd you say?
I said it faded out. Just move your phone around.
Oh, that right there? Yeah, so that's 150. And then conversely, if we slow it down to 30, which is where we start a lot of people, right there. So you're looking to start a new rep every single time you hear that beat. And it's really, really crucial because a lot of people, what I've found is that since using the metronomes and prescribing it to my patients as well, and my athletes, if it's performance purposes, we get a lot more bang for your buck in those exercises. And we almost feel like when you make strides, you make improvements, you get a little careless at times. And so things like tempo can actually have a really powerful impact on how much more benefit you're going to get out of an exercise and the carryover to the specific sport itself. So we really can't say enough about using tempos and metronomes. If there's a free app for it, find one that's compatible with your phone and get comfortable with it and start implementing it.
Right. The other one, obviously that's important, and we use this as kind of a return to run test. A lot of you guys can probably do this, but running in place at a 170 beats per minute. Okay, so you just heard 150. 170 is obviously 20 more than that, so it's pretty fast. What you're looking for, similar to as if you're running, reciprocal arm movements. Okay, you're looking for light feet. All right, you'll hear us say we want you to not hit the ground overly hard. That's why we want you increasing your cadence, and we don't want to hear you pound. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Video play. All right, so you're looking for consistency of movement. Yep. And running in place is one of the worst things that you ever have to do. I hate it. All right, so you're just going to kind of run in place, see how you're doing. And my soccer player arms are not too bad here. They're not too flaily. All right. All right, so that's that. That's one of the last ones I think we'll throw in there. All right. Does anybody have any questions about tests before we kind of move forward?
With the single leg hopping, are you trying to focus on keeping your feet relatively stable for that balance perspective? You don't want to be hopping all over the place and have your foot
it's more of a stationary hop. So you're not looking to like do a forward, backward, side to side. Obviously we may throw some athletes into that if they need it, if they've had ankle injuries, etc. But that single leg stationary hop, like that single leg hop, is going to be in place, similar to the running in place, similar to the pogo jumps. You know, if we really want to call it, we could call it a single leg pogo. You know, just up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. So that's what you're looking for there.
I have a question too. Would you say that these are common tests that you guys would do for like any runner that comes into the clinic with any kind of pain or injury? You do every test as an assessment?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
100%.
Oftentimes so for instance, if a runner comes in with us with knee pain, if it was a non-traumatic incident, meaning they didn't slip and fall, you know, they didn't get tackled by their dog coming down the stairs or, you know, somebody else. If it's a non-traumatic incident, a gradual onset of pain with the knee, I'll be honest, most of the time I look at the knee, I'm making sure all the major structures are okay, but then I'm immediately going to the hip or to the ankle. So looking at the joints above or below it. So we can't get tunnel vision and just treat one area, which is why with running, because it's such a unique, you know, sport and the demands that it places on left and right and top to bottom. Like even, you know, we've had issues where people aren't even rotating enough. And so they're ending up with, you know, with overuse injuries or stress fractures in their limbs because arm motion and trunk motion is all about conserving energy and momentum. And so if they're running as rigid as a board, their legs have to do a whole lot more work. And I've seen stress fractures because of it. So there's no reason for us not to do the full battery of tests with them because it could be one area breaking down where others could be completely asymptomatic, but it could be a ticking time bomb. Or it could just be for performance purposes and be like, you know what? I don't want to go changing things. You know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But certainly you have some more life out of this. Let's maximize what you've got and see if it makes you any faster or any better. Sorry, Ashley, I kind of took that one.
No, that's fine. But with everything John said, these are tests that, you know, I would say even with some runners, like, you know, we'll do with every runner, but even some athletes that aren't runners, we're going to throw them through a very similar sequence because these are imperative, especially when you are like an athlete who's going to go propel off the ground. These are awesome tests to do. And it's definitely going to look into those little weaknesses that your athletes may have, or that anybody may have, that may have them break down over time. So yes, John went into in depth, but I just reiterate what he says. All right. John, you want to take this?
Sure. So on top of the battery of tests and the readiness performance assessments that we have, we like to funnel runners towards more bang for your buck exercises. You're doing so much time running on the road, and we don't want to overdo it, but we also don't want to ignore the strength training altogether. So we really look at, all right, what's going to give you the most return on investment? So you saw the bridge. So we have a lot of different bridge variations, right? We've got different squat variations, calf raises, a lateral toe tap exercise, the step down exercise, and then a deadlift. And I think we'd say the deadlift is probably one of the most underutilized movements there is.
Mm-hmm.
We prefer a hex bar deadlift. If you're not familiar with that, we'll definitely throw up some information in the Facebook group. But the hex bar is that hexagonally shaped bar that you step into with the handles on the side rather than a straight bar. Purely from studies where they did surface electrode EMG analysis, the hex bar actually targets your quad muscles more and your torso a little bit more than a conventional barbell deadlift does. So it shifts the stress from your hamstrings onto your quads. And most runners that we find come in with knee issues and recurrent issues or recalcitrant issues don't have nearly enough strength in their quad muscle complex or just enough lean muscle tissue in general. So the deadlift exercise is really one of the best bang for your buck exercises out there. Every single one of our runners has to be able to master this. And we love, you're all going to go crazy now, but we want you to be able to deadlift 1.5 to 2 times your body weight. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts there. It's just been shown the most efficient runners who are injury-free are the ones who have enough strength to be able to do that for at least, anywhere from 3 to 10 reps. So that's just one of those. But so the bridge, the squat, there are tons of different variations. And we gave you this chart here. So vertically up and down is the variation of the exercise on the top. But these are probably the 6 exercises that we prioritize the most with all of our runners. And it's funny because it's like, oh, all right, you have back pain? Cool. We're going to deadlift and we're going to do some lateral toe taps. Oh, you have knee pain? We're going to deadlift. We're going to do some lateral toe taps. So it's really convenient that a lot of these exercises have so much carryover to other parts of your body.
Yep. I was going to say for everybody, like the lateral toe tap, if you've been in the clinic with us, if you've followed us on social media, you've probably seen us do this a million times. I think everybody knows a bridge, squat, calf raise, step down. Step down is what I did in the video, but a lateral toe tap, right? Just so I can get up, and Mickey's taking over the mat. I don't know, I might have to get pretty far back. But a lateral toe tap, you are standing, okay, butt back slightly, other leg slightly bent. What you're doing, tapping out to the side and back, okay? It's out to the side and back. So if I stand here, this leg's slightly bent, I'm back, tapping out to the side. And typically what we'll have is we'll have a band around the knees, okay, to start, and we'll add in some holds. Or here you can see when we say counterweight, we're talking about like holding a weight out in front of you. Does anybody have questions on this? Thoughts, concerns before we move on?
I do. What's the tempo at the bottom?
So tempo, we can use one of 2 things. We can throw for the lateral toe taps, we can do it to speed, okay? Similar to what we were doing with some of the other exercises. When we talk about like, so tempo. Tempo just means it's to a certain beat. So if we're doing like a squat with tempo, we may do like a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then shoot up. Okay, so it's going to be a slow lower and then shoot up. Does that make sense?
So it's just one other level of difficulty we can add on top. When people are saying, yeah, I can squat, I'm great at that. I'm like, all right, cool, let me see. And they do that. I'm like, all right, awesome. Now let's slow it down. And then we slow it down. And as soon as we slow it down, now all sorts of things start to rear their ugly heads. It's really easy to do things with speed and momentum. And oftentimes we find You know, that's one of the first things that I learned a couple years ago, you know, working with a lot of other colleagues who specialize in runners, is that, you know, I would scratch my head. I'm like, they're super strong. Why are they injured? What's happening? And then they told me, slow it down. And then as soon as you slow it down, it's like, oh yeah, I mean, they're strong, but they don't have enough control. So they're strong in certain aspects, but muscles contract in very different ways. And once you slow things down, you have control. That's where it's more important. I love the analogy where I'm like, yeah, if you give me a Ferrari and you put me on a racetrack, doesn't mean I'm going to go fast just because I got a fast car. If I have no clue how to control that power, you know, I'm going to spin out off the track, or I'm going to destroy the clutch, or I'm going to do all sorts of weird things, but you can guarantee I'm not going to make it to the finish line quickly or in one piece.
It's very true.
So there's some of these things on this, in this table, that I can say, oh yeah, I pretty much know what that is, but there's quite a few that I don't. Any suggestions on where to, because what you went through with the test was great, because then I can always look back and say, okay, that's what you meant. You know, what about with these? Any suggestions on?
Yeah, I'd say this is where, you know, we'll have to be better and throw up some videos for you in the Facebook group to give you some visual references. And the nice thing is, we try to, you know, be respectful of the time. I think we only have one more slide and then we're done for tonight, but we've had some great discussion, which is great. You know, but we didn't want to throw too much in here. So
sure.
I think what we'll do is we'll have to kind of create a little video library instead and throw them up for you guys to have access to as well. Because you're right. I mean, if you don't know it, I mean, sure, I generally don't like to suggest Googling things and going to the internet because there's so much out there and it's usually incorrect. So, you know, with respect to running, you know, that's where one exercise could be great. You know, it's when I flip open a Men's Fitness magazine, they're like, oh, 8 exercises that'll bulletproof your shoulders. I'm like, yeah, that's great if this person demands X, Y, and Z. But person who has demands PQRS is going to benefit from 6 completely different exercises. So I think that's where it's just a little wary, you know, if you look online. So we'll, that's my long-winded way of saying, we got you. We'll take care of it.
Cool. Thanks.
No, thank you for bringing that up.
These are different ways that we implement these. So once we give you kind of the ideas of where they are, these are some sets, reps, kind of percent of body weight. So how much weight you should possibly use with some of these things. And we'll go through these a little bit more. You can always ask questions, but these are kind of where we might start with some people. And these are by no means the end all be all of what we would do with somebody. So we may do, you know, 10 bridges with March. We may do a goblet squat, which is carrying kind of weight in front of you here, kettlebell, you know, 10 to 20% of your body weight, 8 to 12 reps, you know, something like that. Or if you get above 50% of your body weight, you might be doing 5 reps. Really depends on what we're looking for. And this is kind of where, you know, if you have questions, definitely feel free to reach out, because this is where it gets tricky. This is where it gets tricky. And this is where kind of where we can help guide a little bit. Any questions here? All right.
Yeah, I have a question, and this has all been great. But once you have, like, when you go through the initial testing that you described, then how you take that information and translate that to an exercise prescription, whether it's based on these exercises or others. Can you talk a little bit more about that process?
Yeah, absolutely. Ashley, do you want to go first? You want me?
John, go ahead.
So usually the thing I like about the, you know, the benchmark assessments is they're just that, they're benchmarks. That's the bare minimum we want people to be able to hit. So I will always start them and test them in that position. And then I will regress each exercise just enough that we'll be able to execute, you know, like either 30 seconds or 10 reps, whatever the desired outcome is, with minimal pain. Notice I'm not saying no pain, I'm saying minimal pain. Minimal pain and good form. So there's 2 different types of fatigue. You could have physical fatigue, or you could have technical fatigue, where their form starts to slack before they feel like they're even getting tired. So we like to account for both of those. So we'll start at that benchmark and then we'll just work backwards. So for instance, I'll have somebody up in that bridge position with that straight leg raise. And if I notice that, if I'm looking front to back, if I notice that their hip starts to drop a little or they're arching their back with that leg straight, I'll say, okay, let's bend that knee instead into a 90-degree position and we'll keep it straight up. And then most of the time, most runners that come in can handle that better, but it's still a challenge for them once we get to like the 20, 25, 30-second mark of the second rep. So not many people need to be regressed more than that. If they need to be regressed more than that, then I'll go to double leg instead of a single leg bridge. And I'll challenge them and say, okay, let's get your hands off the ground or elbows off the ground and things of that nature. So I will basically, I'll find the variation that's regressed as little bit as possible while minimizing their symptoms to like below, I'd say like maybe a 3 or 4 out of 10. And we'll talk about pain levels in a different lecture, but we're looking for a drastic reduction in symptoms if they're coming in with some sort of pain or acute injury or complaint. So that's usually what I'll look for.
Spot on. We really need to take into account what we're looking at with the athlete in front of us and how we're going through the tests. If we see that little bit of an anomaly that we need to change or things that need to get stronger, we will go from there. And I think if people are going through these themselves and they're kind of saying, hey, you know what, this is where I feel like I'm having a little bit of weakness, that's where I say, hey, you know what, shoot us a message, ask us. But there are ways to modify all of these. And I think John and I will kind of go through that, and we'll kind of go through a little bit more step by step as to how you can possibly do that. Sorry, dogs are going crazy behind me. But really just looking at, like John was saying, looking at the regressions, how it would work, and implementing it into rehab. And John said I was going to come out with this really awesome quote. I'll do it now. 30% of elite runners go to the starting line with some type of pain, right? So that's something to take home from this. It's not that every runner should be pain-free. It's not that when you go to the starting line, you should be pain-free. You know, if you can run and it gets better as you're running and it doesn't stay or linger later that day and it's not worse the next day, hey, you know what? Green flag, keep going. You know, don't stop. Don't stop just because you feel a little bit of something. And I can say I was out on a run today. My knee started to bother me a little bit. I literally changed my step width and ta-da, it was gone. So that's just kind of something to throw out there. There's variables that you can change as you go. And we'll talk about these next lecture that you can manage yourself as you run to say, hey, you know what? How am I feeling here? Is there something that I can change as I'm going that may make this a little bit different, and go from there? So I kind of went on a tangent, Justin, sorry.
Yeah, Justin, do you have anything else to add there?
No, I am good. I'm trying to stay on mute because there's a fight going on as the kids are trying to go to sleep.
UFC 250.
Yeah, it seems that Stacy's lost the battle tonight.
Oh, no. One other thing I will say is there was a great quote that was put up there too by one of our mentors when it comes to running. I mean, the first thing is that very infrequently do runners come in and we actually tell them they have to stop running. So that's another take home for you guys as runners yourselves. You know, if you work with runners yourselves, you know, Justin, Liz, we don't tell them they have to stop running altogether. Sometimes we'll modify some volume, mostly intensity, but when it comes to a lot of injuries, especially a tendinous injury, tendons benefit from being loaded immediately. And Justin, that was something we talked about when you hopped on with us with our video call. Tendons need to be loaded immediately. So stopping all activity altogether and saying, yeah, I'm going to let it rest for 2 weeks. Well, if you let something rest for 2 weeks, you're actually losing a lot of capacity, a lot of strength. You're probably just going to sensitize the area because it's not used to doing any work. So keep in mind, if you feel something, guys, like Ashley said, modify something. Maybe I won't go out as fast. Maybe I'm not going to tackle those hills, you know, that I had planned today. Maybe I'm just going to keep it easy, you know, do a fun route, you know, increase my step cadence a little bit, which we'll talk about too. But the take home is that you don't have to stop altogether. And very rarely do we tell people to stop unless we suspect some sort of structural issue, bone stress injury, things of that nature. But there's another quote that was put up and it said, running rehab is often messy. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it has to be progressive. So Justin, this ties back into your question where you ask us, you know, how do we know what to do with people? As long as we have a pattern in place where we know which variation they're starting in, like what their entry point is into that exercise, and we know which way to progress them, as long as we're always working towards that progression and we're getting stronger and stronger and they're getting better and better, we know we're on the right path. Sometimes you may flare up again if they go out, they're like, yeah, you know, I decided to run a little bit and I did my 5 miler again and it was barking at me a little bit more afterwards. I'm like, all right, well, did it go away? Yeah. All right, that's good. You know, even though you had a little increase in symptoms, if we're mitigating it and the athletes have a good understanding of where we're coming from and we have a conversation with them initially and manage expectations, yeah, pain-free is not the goal right now. We want to keep you running, but we just want to make sure we're mitigating your symptoms, keep them under control, and we're constantly moving forward. Even if we're zigzagging back and forth, as long as we're still climbing the ladder on the rehab or the exercise list, we're golden.
Say like rehab, especially for runners, looks like this kind of climbing roller coaster that goes up and down. And every once in a while, you may have that dip, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you drop that low. Okay, so it's kind of this up and down, up and down, up and down, until you finally hit that spot where you can continue. And like we said, it's not always about running without pain. You know, everybody's going to typically have something's going on. And it's okay to run through it as long as, you know, it's not lingering and it's not staying and it's not changing your form and it's not making you limp. Those are all things that we'll kind of go over in upcoming lectures too. So I think this kind of slide sums it all up. We already said these are by no means the variations we prescribe. Individual findings will dictate which exercise variations are prioritized for each runner, which is extremely important. Framework always remains the same. And the big thing that we always throw out there is work smarter, not harder. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit more too, but you always want to make sure that you are training appropriately. And you don't want to put too much stress on your bodies. The more work that you do, if you are underprepared or if you're too fatigued, you are at a higher risk for injury. All right. And then cheers. All right. All right. Anybody have any more questions, thoughts, concerns? Running around in red Solo Cup costumes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, you know, based on everything going on now, that's like a good thing. We could have races if we just made everybody wear like hula hoops and they had to stay that far apart.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Costumes. Big costumes.
There was actually a guy that posted a video. He took a bunch of tent poles and taped them all together, and he, like 6 feet all the way around him, and he was running down trails. And you guys should look it up. It's pretty funny. I'll try and find it and post it in the group. It's a pretty good video.
Yeah, well, they used to have that thing at Gold's, the bubble sports.
Yep.
Not running bubbles.
Yeah. I like it. Perfect. All right. So we have this whole thing recorded, and so the process is slightly messy to get it up into the Facebook group. So it's got to download through here and then upload into YouTube, and then from there over to Facebook. So, but that should be up hopefully by tonight, maybe by tomorrow morning. And I will also throw in there the PDF file. So if you want to just reference through there, and then you'll be able to also click on any of the videos and rewatch them and stuff like that. And we'll get some video demonstrations of the exercises and stuff up there too.
Thank you.
We also have any questions?
Thank you guys for a great first night.
Yeah.
Good discussions.
Yeah, very good.
Good discussions.
Good night.
All right.
All right.
Night, everybody. Have a good night,
Have
okay?
a great night, guys.
We'll see you soon.